Hello, my name is Michelle Young Maplethorpe, and I'm Vice President for Global Artistic Programs and Director of the Asia Society Museum in New York. I'm delighted to be here with you tonight to welcome you to this evening's Asia Society at the Movies program, featuring a discussion on the Oscar shortlisted documentary, The Rescue. We're thrilled to present a discussion with the Academy Award-winning makers of Free Solo, Chai, Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin, on their new documentary, The Rescue. This film is a thrilling account of the 2018 rescue mission of 12 boys and their football coach from a flooded cave in Thailand. We're honored to host Golden Globe and Emmy Award-winning producer and Asia Society Southern California board member Janet Yang, who will be moderating the conversation with the directors and the producers this evening. Looking ahead, we're continuing to present a robust season of virtual programs globally and locally in the areas of arts and culture, policy, and education. So please, again, for any of our programs you may be interested in at any of our 14 global centers, please consult our website at www.asiasociety.org. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Janet Yang. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone, and hello, Jimmy and Chai. It's so good to see you. Always a privilege. I've been recommending this. I've been recommending The Rescue to every single person who hasn't already seen it, and hopefully by this evening there are many more that have, because I think we're living in a time with a lot of existential dread and despair. There are issues circling around us that seem to be beyond our control. There's a lot of divisiveness in our country, in the world. We are kind of behind the curve in a lot of ways in terms of what's happening with AI. And yet you made this movie that is so much about basic human components, human survival, human ingenuity, human faith, commitment. And I think it's something that we all need so desperately in our hearts right now. When you first heard the story about these young Thai boys who were stuck in a cave, what made you decide that this was a movie you had to make? And at what point did you think there was enough for you to go on to make this movie?
I think like many people around the world, like if we think about that summer of 2018, it was a pretty dark moment politically and globally. And I just think like, just parents and, compassionate human beings, we were engaged by this story. And, I think what really stayed with us was this idea about how so many different types of people from different walks of life, different religions, countries, creeds, colors came together, and only together were they able to achieve something that was really seemingly impossible. Like it shouldn't have been able to happen, but it did. It was like a miracle. And that idea just kind of stuck with us. And so we pursued the story as, fervently, and then finally had the opportunity sometime later to start telling the story.
At any point, did you wonder whether you had enough to go on because this was happening in a distant place and not all the footage was available at the time? You couldn't be there. It's not like Free Solo Maru where you're right there with everything happening in the moment. How did you know that you could weave this incredible story together?
Well, it's funny because we're always moved first by the story, right? And like Chai said, it was just a story that we really felt compelled to tell. We also felt like this was such an incredible reminder of what moral courage looks like, and we just felt like, given what you said as well, this is a great moment for a story like that, that we felt, and we also felt that, that we would love to share it with the world. So, you come into these stories and you think more about those ideas, and then you dig in, and only then do you realize, okay, well, these are the complications or challenges that we're now facing. and it's a process of discovery of what these challenges are. And as documentary filmmakers, that's what you do. You try to solve these challenges. And the challenges were that there was no footage inside the cave, or no real known footage outside of these, few clips. There was a lot of questions around what the timeline was and what the story was, because it was such a fragmented story. And this film, more than the previous two films that we made together, was a pretty significant forensic exercise as well. Just getting the timeline down, understanding what actually happened, corroborating all the stories, because there's so many people involved with so many different, tasks and perceptions of what was going on. That was a huge challenge as well.
Jimmy, you're not afraid of challenges, clearly. And I'm fascinated how you developed the climbing skills along with your photography skills. Did one come first before the other, or did they evolve simultaneously? You've been able to integrate the two perfectly.
No, I was certainly a climber first, and then became a photographer, but those careers certainly evolved in parallel. But I think the misperception is that, I'm a climber and I go on expeditions and I'm very tenacious and I make a living by being very persevering and intrepid. But that's probably because they don't know my wife, Chai. If you really want to know tenacious, this film really wouldn't have been possible without, Chai taking the lead on really acquiring the footage that we needed to make this film. And how we kind of dealt with one of the challenges was that we had heard that there was some footage that the Thai Navy SEALs had, that they had shot. We had no idea how much, but we knew that they had it, and we negotiated for 2 years. And I will say Chai mostly negotiated for 2 years, but we did it over Zoom. And they said no probably 100 times. And then when I had pretty much given up, Chai said, no, I'm going to fly to Thailand. Now that I have my second vaccination, I'm going to do 2 weeks of quarantine, and I'm going to go and actually meet the Admiral of the Thai Navy SEALs. And then I'm going to convince him to give us this footage. And you have to remember, the Thai Navy SEALs, they run covert operations. They do not publicize the work that they do. It's just culturally not, in their, what they do in their world. So Chai went, I don't know what she said, but she convinced the Thai Navy SEAL Admiral to hand over the footage. And they didn't actually hand it over to her. They flew a delegation of Thai Navy SEALs with the hard drives in a briefcase to New York, to our editing studio.
Chai, I think you need to tell us how you convinced the Admiral.
Well, it's interesting, especially because we're speaking to the Asia Society audience, where Jimmy and I wanted to make this film desperately because it was an incredibly important and, only increasingly poignant story about what connects us as humans, but also because we felt like we were in a really unique position. For me, I'm half Chinese and I'm half Hungarian. And I grew up with the spirituality that you see in the film through my mother. And yet my father, who's a professor of artificial intelligence, the ultimate, the consummate scientist. And the idea of these worlds coexisting was something that was very present for both Jimmy and myself. And we knew that we could listen. And that, there are as a filmmaker, there are narrative decisions you make. There are lots of decisions, more entertaining or truthful, but for us, we're nonfiction filmmakers, so we're bound by the truth or journalistic ethics. And so the idea of this film was you had to listen to everybody, because it was only together that they were able to achieve this. And, I have to say though, again, in terms of the Asia Society, idea or premise is that, we also went in being like, we understand the Asian culture, like we speak Chinese, like we've dealt with this. And I have to say, like, Thai culture is very different from Chinese culture. And these conversations with the Thai Navy SEALs, these negotiations were very meaningful. And when I finally was on the ground with them and understood their own hesitations about religion in Thailand has been portrayed traditionally in Hollywood movies as being like hocus pocus sort of situation. And I was like, no, we actually don't think that way. And like, truly, like, who's to say that, the monk Krum Bunchum didn't save the children? Like, or he certainly contributed, and like the children's faith contributed to their own survival. So I think it was just seeing someone eye to eye, and then also this idea that we actually had the commitment to come to Thailand and walk the cave ourselves and like meet the children, that the Thai Navy SEALs felt like we had credibility. And I totally agree with them. It's how do you trust anyone with your story? But it's funny because like, we have this amazing executive producer. His name's Tanet Natsiri, and he is Thai. And you actually see him in the film. He's in charge of all the water diversion, like the water engineering. And he said to me, like, we only met on Zoom. We only met in person in the Singapore airport. Because when I was like, I'm going to Thailand, he's like, you can't go alone. I was like, why not? I've been to Thailand 5 times. He's like, you cannot go alone. And when we were about to meet the Admiral, he's like, you can't ask for what you want immediately. And I was like, oh, I've got 2 years on Zooms of saying exactly what I want over and over again. He's like, we should just talk about our families. Even he's like, change your picture on your WhatsApp to you with your kids. And I was like, got it. So I don't know. Like, I think the real point is that like Asia is multifaceted, multinational, like I don't know, there's so many different dimensions of being Asian, multicultural. Yeah. And this was a really interesting exercise in that. But at the same time, like, we had to listen, and that was the important part of this.
I believe there's one thing you did, though, that really helped you get over the hurdle. Walking the caves, perhaps?
Yes. So when I got there, it was really important if I was going to be like, this is the first film that Jimmy and I have made where we weren't there for the principal action. And even had we been there during the rescue, we would never have had access to the cave itself because it just was too risky. There are too many powers at play. So when I got there, Vern Unsworth, who is in the movie, as well as Tanet, insisted that I walk the cave. And I was like, no way. Like, it's May. Like, the kids were trapped in like July. Like, why would I ever do this? And they, just because of my competitive nature, they were like, well, listen, none of the other directors have walked the cave. And it was like, okay, I'm walking the cave. Done. And in the first, like, Jimmy is the adventurous one. He's a professional athlete. I am not. I grew up in Manhattan. And, the first minute I'm scared in the cave. And then I start thinking about how much our children who are 8 and 6 right now would have loved it. Because it is like it's like such an exploration. Like, this is like what being an explorer is. And you understand exactly why those kids went in. Like, Northern Thailand is hot. Their lives are hard. And the cave was just kind of like the last swim of the season, or like the last ski run of the winter, and the last ice skate. And I have to say, like, I didn't understand the scale until I saw it myself. And I also didn't understand why you needed thousands of people to support these 10, volunteer, European divers. Because just, you couldn't, like, you see it in the film, like 200 people were needed just to hand pass a child on a stretcher to get out of the cave from chamber 3 to 1. So it was really the scale. And so then the Thai Navy SEALs were like, okay, she went in. She actually means what she's trying to say. She's legit. And so then they definitely, it helped our negotiations.
It's such a beautiful glimpse into Thai culture as well. And I know that you are like a cultural bridge with other cultures, because I went and saw the film that you made before you met Jimmy, before you had this beautiful partnership. You made a documentary about Yusun Dor. I believe that's how you say his name. I've long admired his music, and I was weeping watching that film. And the name of the film, I think, is a perfect tagline to what you both do. I bring what I love. And that says it all to me, because it seems that that's what you're both driven by. You love something, you're compelled to do it. Can you speak about whether that making of that film and the other works that you've had, and the same thing with Jimmy's work, is it that? Is it that it's you just bring what you love?
I think so. It's people always are like, the films are so different. What unifies them? Why do you guys work together? And it was Rob Moss, who teaches at Harvard, who was one of my mentors at the Sundance Labs. And he finally said it was like when he was moderating a Q&A for The Rescue, and he's like, it's warmth. You guys bring warmth. And I was like, that's absolutely what we bring. And it's what all nonfiction brings, right? All filmmakers are making films where they love some part of it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, documentaries are so hard that it has to be something that really moves you to make you commit to these stories. And for me, I always say it's the last answer any student wants to hear, where I'm I don't want to make any films, and I'm backed into a corner. I'm saying no, until you are absolutely compelled. It's the only chance for the story to get out if you can tell the story. But yeah, I mean, that is the through thread, or the thread through all of our work, is that it's something very personal. It always has to be personal for us. And, my work in Africa was motivated by my best friend from childhood, from kindergarten through college, who died 9/11. And I became kind of obsessed with this idea of representations of Islam. And so that's how I met Yusu, and was kind of moved through that. And just, I don't know, who knows how many films we're going to make in our lives. And
they have to be meaningful.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of how Jimmy and I fell in love, where he sent me this, we had met at a conference, and then he sent me this footage of a film he was working on, which was Meru. And when I watched the dailies, I was just astonished by this man's love for his relationship to the outdoors, as well as how he balanced his traditional Chinese values with this incredibly intrepid and death-defying profession. And so it was kind of love that brought us together in that film, because I was I know how to make these films, but I need to best help him best express himself. And so I just think it's always kind of been that way. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But Janet, it's not very many people talk about it. So thank you, Janet.
Yeah.
No, it really was another incredible movie. And I'm sure the audiences are looking forward to everything that you're both doing together. Is there anything you can talk about where you bring that Asian discipline to the warmth, the humanity, the love, just the sense of the curiosity, that goes into the filmmaking, the commitment to just taking the story to the end is how I see it. It's just, you just don't stop. So is there anything you can share that
I mean, I think stories have always been very powerful for me. Both my parents were librarians at a university. I grew up with books.
Jimmy grew up in Minnesota because his parents in China read that Minnesota was a good place to raise children.
Yes, because they met at graduate school in the United States, but they both, originally came from mainland China. But I just read voraciously when I was a kid, and was always moved so much by these books and stories. And I think I always understood the power of storytelling and how it could make people feel, how it could change your worldview. And I think that's kind of compelled me to do the work that I do. I always, especially when I meet or find characters or subjects or participants of films that I really care about and kind of fall in love with. And, in The Rescue, I was just so moved by all of these volunteers who were, giving up their time and sacrificing time to do work or be with their families to try to help someone. And that idea of generosity was so moving. And also, these divers who basically had everything to lose, by even participating.
Including their own lives, perhaps.
Including their own lives. They were risking their own lives physically, but also, potentially living with the psychic trauma of carrying out, these kids that they might kill in the process of trying to save them. And they could end up in jail. And yet there was just no hesitation because, they really show us what the best of humanity is. And, that just seemed like a really important story to tell. And I think, we're always so accountable to the participants in the film. So, we have our own standards of excellence that we try to achieve in our work, but we also have the responsibility of telling these stories in a way that we feel is going to move people and have them understand these characters.
And that level of generosity and commitment, we see it sometimes if we're wanting to protect or save a loved one, but this is the kindness of strangers. And I think that's what makes it even that much more compelling. All I know is the world is such a better place because of the work that you both do. And to inspire people to think about how they can also serve. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for me, at least, and probably for many people who watch the film. We have about 15 minutes to answer some questions from the audience, if there are such. I could talk forever, and I'll ask my own if there aren't questions, but are there? Okay, question. When you shot reenactments, how did you determine what would look authentic? I know you may question the word reenactment. Perhaps.
Yes. So the British divers are loath they cannot stand this idea of acting. So they would always call them recreations. And I would be like, well, I think this is a British American thing because recreation seems more artificial than reenactment to me, but that we agreed to disagree. But basically, when we signed on to this film, very quickly we realized there was no footage to illustrate the story, but there was a great story, and normally in nonfiction, there's lots of footage and no story, just because. And so we knew kind of from the outset that we'd have to do reenactments. And basically, the only way we could get the divers to participate was by saying, just show us what you did, demonstrate what you did. And I have to say, again, it was the first film that Jimmy and I made that we weren't present for the actual action. And you can hear so many first-person primary accounts of what it was like to bring an anesthetized child for 2.5 hours out of a cave. But when you actually see, because we hired, Thai child actors in England, all of this was shot during the pandemic in England, because all the divers were in England. Most of the divers were in England. When you actually see someone bind a kid's hands behind their back, bind their feet together and push their head underwater, you see with your own eyes, the gravity of the responsibility that these men were willing to take on is astonishing, and it, I often tear up in this moment where it just, what prepared them to do this? Why was it why didn't they hesitate when everyone else was saying no, don't do it, you're crazy, whatever it is. And Dr. Harris's wife was you're going to be, she's a doctor. She's oh, she laughed when she heard about it. She was you're going to be known as the guy who killed the kids. And yet they did it. And so there were lots of things when the guys showed up in their real gear that they actually wore at the rescue, and there's duct tape holding it together. There are rips, there's mud, probably from Thailand on their stuff. And we're oh, of course the military was a little bit skeptical. I'm skeptical, So the reenactments ended up being incredibly valuable for us as filmmakers. I think what also we got kind of had a documentary miracle when we were able to secure the footage from the Thai Navy SEALs. What happens is that essentially all the most critical moments are real, like when the children are anesthetized, when John and Rick find the children for the first time, when the oxygen meter, or when you see the 200 people passing the children. So the reenactments end up being like kind of the connective tissue where you can actually understand how they move the children through stuff that could never have been filmed. But I think that kind of, it's that weaving together that really worked.
And even the fact that they had little faith that it was going to work. In other words, they weren't going in saying, I'm going to save these children. They didn't know if it was going to work. So that it wasn't that they could even very obviously become heroic. They were risking everything.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it was basically like, is it better to try to save one child than walk away and know that you're killing 12 children and their coach because there's no other chance for them? And that, I mean, if we all could be our best selves and be generous and take a risk and just try to be, human, we'd be in a really different place with the pandemic. And that was kind of like the bittersweet part of this film. And Janet, like you actually brought up like in a conversation we had a while ago, this idea that like part of the film that's important is this idea that like, because of the pandemic, we're all questioning what do we do? And like, how do we bring meaning into our lives? And for these divers, like they were like strange guys who had this strange hobby and were weekend warriors and maybe wasted their lives underwater, whatever it is. And suddenly with the rescue, Rick Santon had been actually preparing for 40 years for this opportunity to save 13 lives. And so it became a calling, and that was, again, like this totally unintended consequence of telling the story that we didn't, just was in some way.
I also appreciate how low tech it is in a way. It seems that right now we're living in an environment where there's so much going on in the world of the digital AI universe and metaverse, and people are looking to that for solutions. But we have so many solutions that are just, closer to home. And the fact that those guys developed this hobby that, not because they thought they were going to save lives necessarily, but, there are many things that are very, very grounded that we can do in our lives. And I just love that reminder that, it's person to person or person to many people that, we have these opportunities in our everyday lives. So I'm wondering if there are any other questions. If not, I will continue with my own. Did you answer the question? Did you answer the question about what other projects you might be able to talk about in the future that we can look forward to?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few different projects right now. I think one of our next documentaries that we've been working on concurrently, that we even started before the rescue, is a film about some of our mentors, Doug Tompkins and Chris Tompkins and Yvonne Chenard, all, just really incredible people, but they were in some ways kind of defined the ethos of the outdoor adventure world, whether it was climbing and skiing and mountaineering and adventure and exploration. But through their lives, were transformed by the landscapes that they adventured in, and it moved them to become some of the greatest conservationists of our time. And they worked on building 6 national parks and doing the biggest, private land handover to a country in history, like 14 million acres. And to put that into perspective, like I think Yellowstone National Park is our biggest national park, and that's 2 million acres. But it's just an extraordinary tale of people, again, that follows along a lot of our stories that we'd like to tell, achieving the impossible. And there's a beautiful love story in it. And we also thought it was very timely and meaningful right now.
So as parents, how much do your children know what you do, and what do you try to inculcate them with in terms of your values? How do you tie your work together with your family life?
Well, our daughter, who's 8 now, originally thought that movies were sitting outside of a room and eating popcorn. Because that's what we do with her. We'd be like, okay, you can sit here. And then it's like watching mom go on stage or coming on like the, what do you call it? Bjorn, baby Bjorn. It's just, it is what it is. And it's like messy. It's never perfect. And we are, especially because we're parents and collaborators, like it's just kind of like a hot mess all the time. Like, the kids are here, they're screaming, like our daughter is peeking over from the staircase over there.
They haven't made an appearance yet, unfortunately.
I know. Normally they do.
They normally do.
Especially when it's like a really important interview over Zoom.
Yes.
Like the head of NASA, like James will come to my head. And it's amazing. I don't know. I think we were both kind of later in life when we had kids, and it's fun. And, I just say to everybody, like, you just try your best. You just, try your best. And I think it's important.
Have they seen the movies? Have they seen Free Solo, Meru, and the rescue?
And it's funny.
They haven't seen Meru because their father may have cursed 17 times in the movie.
It's rated R, and I don't know that we necessarily want our kids to know.
Maybe even,
I think the big thing that I don't know if we necessarily want the kids to know what Daddy's doing when he leaves for several months on expedition.
Yes, well, that's a really interesting question.
But like Marina's watched Free Solo, we don't know how many times. And then this summer she climbed the Grand Teton, and I think is probably the youngest girl to ever climb the Grand Teton. And she didn't think it was a big deal at all because she thought, that was Alex's goal, to climb this, wall. And like, that's very normal. And my goal is to climb the Grand Teton. And she went and did it. And, she worked towards it. She climbed a different smaller mountain. She rock climbed a bunch, and then she was ready. And then she went and climbed it. So maybe I think there might have been some influence from our work.
Somebody's got Daddy's genes. A friend of mine who has a 12-year-old son actually just told me they watched the movie and the son was freaking out. I mean, he had to run out of the movie screaming. He was so scared and so nervous. Really relieved, of course. But, that I can imagine why that movie would have an effect on a 12-year-old. And
it's also like having kids is like why it was really important for us to make the rescue, and also that it's rated PG, because like it's something everyone can watch together. And that was similar with Free Solo. Is it like, here's an opportunity to talk about something that's different and experience other people's faith and, what life is like, on the other side of the world. And, when I was first pregnant with Marina, and like, you work so hard in your career as a woman, and then suddenly like this other thing happens, it's really important, which is having children. And I'll never forget, like I had a professor who said to me, like, the best thing you can do is show your children something that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
So then hopefully they can find their passion. And like, that's kind of what I hold on to. My mom worked all her life. She actually was CFO of the Asia Society in New York for about 5 years. Yes. And, I don't know. I think you can do both, but like, it's never pretty. And it's always messy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, again, I go back to, I bring what I love. And I think the two of you have love to spare, and just your passion, as you say, the warmth, but also the ability to maybe again, those Asian genes working overtime. These are not ordinary feats by ordinary people. So what you see on camera, but also what's obviously happening behind the camera is a bit superhuman. And, something for others to aspire to, for filmmakers. And yes, documentarians, fortunately, I believe are getting so much more of the attention they've deserved all along, because we want things that are real, that are real. And I again speak on behalf of everyone who's seen your film. Thank you, thank you, thank you for bringing something
Thank
Janet,
you.
thank you so much for having us.
to us.
Oh,
Thank you
you.
to the Asia
Yeah.
Society too for having us.